One afternoon, a young man walked into the courtroom with a stiffness in his posture that didn't match his age. He couldn't have been more than 25, but the way he held himself made him look older, like someone carrying something heavier than just a legal case. At the plaintiff's table sat an older woman, neatly dressed, her back straight, her expression sharp and controlled. She didn't look at him when he entered. She didn't acknowledge him at all. The judge took her seat and reviewed the file briefly. The case involved alleged property damage and theft. The woman claimed the young man had been staying in her rental property and had caused significant damage before leaving without paying rent. She listed broken fixtures, missing appliances, and unpaid dues that totaled nearly $15,000. When asked to speak, she did so clearly, confidently, without hesitation. "He destroyed my property," she said, and then he disappeared. Her tone carried certainty. No emotion, just facts, at least the kind she was presenting. The judge nodded and turned to the defendant. "Your response?" The young man hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward slightly. "I didn't destroy anything," he said quietly. His voice wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive either. It sounded restrained. The judge raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're saying none of this happened?" "I'm saying it didn't happen the way she's describing." The distinction caught the judge's attention. She leaned back slightly. "Then explain." The young man swallowed, glancing briefly toward the woman before looking back at the judge. "I was living there," he said. "Yes, but I didn't break things. Most of it was already damaged." The woman let out a short, sharp breath, almost a laugh, but didn't interrupt. The judge noticed. "You'll get your turn," she said calmly, then gestured for the defendant to continue. "There were problems from the beginning," he added. "Leaking pipes, electrical issues, the fridge barely worked." The woman shook her head immediately. "That's not true," she said, her voice cutting through his. The judge raised her hand. "Ma'am." The room settled again. The judge turned back to the young man. "Do you have any proof of these conditions?" He hesitated. "Photos," he said. "From when I moved in." The judge nodded. "Let's see them." He handed over his phone. The clerk connected it to the courtroom screen. Images appeared one by one. A cracked sink, water stains on the ceiling, a refrigerator with its door slightly misaligned, exposed wiring near a wall outlet. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying each image. The woman's expression tightened, but she didn't speak. "These were taken when?" the judge asked. "The first week I moved in." The judge glanced at the timestamps. They aligned. She nodded once, then leaned back again. "So there were existing issues." The woman finally spoke, her voice controlled but firmer now. "Minor issues," she said. "Normal wear, not destruction." The judge looked at her. "And the missing appliances?" "They were there," the woman insisted. "A microwave, a washing machine, gone." The judge turned back to the defendant. "Where are they?" The young man hesitated again, this time longer. "I didn't take them," he said, but something in his tone had shifted, slightly, just enough to be noticed. The judge caught it immediately. She didn't confront it directly. Instead, she asked another question. "Why did you leave?" Another pause. "I couldn't stay there," he said. "It wasn't safe." The woman scoffed quietly. "Convenient," she muttered. The judge ignored the comment for the moment. "What do you mean by unsafe?" she asked. The young man's jaw tightened. "There were problems with the wiring," he said. "Sparks. Sometimes the lights would flicker." The judge nodded slowly. "And you reported this?" "Yes." "To whom?" The young man hesitated. The silence stretched. "To her," he said finally, gesturing toward the plaintiff. The judge turned to the woman. "Did he report electrical issues?" The woman shook her head immediately. "No, never." The contradiction hung in the air. The judge tapped her pen lightly against the desk. "We have conflicting statements," she said. "That's not unusual." She looked back at the defendant. "You say you left because it was unsafe, But according to her, you left after causing damage and taking items. The young man nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the weight of that contrast. Yes? The judge leaned forward. So here's the question, she said. Why should I believe you? The room went completely still. Even the faint background noises seemed to fade. The young man looked down at his hands. For a moment, it seemed like he might repeat what he had already said, deny everything, maintain the same position, but he didn't. Instead, he took a slow breath, and when he looked up again, something had changed. I didn't take everything, he said. The shift was immediate. The woman's head snapped slightly in his direction. The judge's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? She asked. Another pause. I took the microwave, he admitted. The words landed softly, but their impact was sharp. The courtroom didn't react loudly. It went quiet. Not the normal quiet of listening. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes when something unexpected breaks through the surface of a carefully controlled situation. The judge didn't interrupt. She let him continue. I needed money, he said. I sold it. The woman stared at him, stunned. You said you didn't take anything, she said, her voice no longer controlled. I didn't take everything, he repeated, but there was no strength behind it now. The judge leaned back slowly, her expression shifting, not surprised, but more focused. Why admit that now? She asked. The young man didn't answer immediately. Because it's true, he said. The judge tilted her head slightly. That didn't stop you from denying it a few minutes ago. He nodded. I know. The silence deepened again, because now the case had changed. Not completely, but enough. The judge looked at the screen again, then back at him. What else? She asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, and for a moment it wasn't clear whether the young man was going to answer, or whether that single confession was all he was willing to give. The young man stood still, his shoulders slightly lowered now, as if the effort of holding everything in place had started to slip. The judge didn't rush him. She waited. What else? She repeated, her tone calm but firm. The young man swallowed, his eyes briefly shifting toward the floor before returning to the judge. The washing machine, he said quietly. I didn't take it. The judge's expression didn't change. That's not what I asked, she replied. I asked what else you took. The distinction landed immediately. He hesitated again, longer this time. I took the microwave, he said again, almost as if repeating it might limit the damage. The judge leaned forward slightly. And? Silence. The woman's breathing had become more noticeable now. Not loud, but uneven. She was watching him closely, waiting for something, either denial or confirmation. The young man's jaw tightened. I tried to take the washing machine, he said finally. The room shifted again, but I couldn't move it, he added quickly. The woman shook her head in disbelief. This is unbelievable, she said under her breath. The judge raised a hand without looking at her. Let him finish, the young man continued, his voice still controlled but no longer steady. I unplugged it. Moved it a little, but it was too heavy. The judge nodded once, processing. So you intended to take it? He didn't argue. Yes. The judge tapped her pen lightly against the desk, her gaze fixed on him. Anything else? The question came again, same tone, same weight. This time, the young man didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes briefly, as if calculating something. What to say, what to hold back, what might happen next. When he opened them again, the hesitation was still there. I damaged the sink, he said. The woman let out a sharp breath. I knew it, she said. The judge didn't react to her. How? She asked. I dropped something heavy, he replied. It cracked. Accidentally? Another pause. Yes. The judge watched him carefully. Your pauses suggest you're choosing your answers very carefully. He didn't deny that. I'm trying to tell the truth, he said. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Then stop editing it. That line landed harder than anything before. The young man straightened slightly, as if the weight of the moment had finally settled fully on him. "I was angry," he said. The words came out more directly this time. The woman froze. "Angry about what?" the judge asked. "The conditions," he said. "The leaks, the wiring. Nothing was getting fixed." The judge tilted her head. "So you decided to damage the property further?" "I didn't plan to," he replied quickly. "It just happened." The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back again, studying him in silence. Because now, piece by piece, the situation was becoming clearer, not through evidence alone, but through his own admissions. She turned briefly to the plaintiff. "You claimed extensive damage," she said. "Do you have documentation beyond estimates?" The woman nodded quickly. "Photos, repair invoices. Let's see them." The clerk displayed the images: broken cabinet doors, a cracked sink basin, scratches along the walls, a disconnected appliance sitting in the middle of the floor. The judge examined each one carefully. Then she looked back at the defendant. "Do you dispute any of this?" He hesitated. "Yes," he said. "Some of it was already like that." The judge nodded slightly. "And some of it wasn't." He didn't respond. That silence answered the question. The judge shifted her focus again. "What about the unpaid rent?" she asked. The young man exhaled slowly. "I couldn't pay," he said. "Why not?" "I lost my job." The woman crossed her arms, her frustration visible now. "And you didn't think to tell me that?" she said. "I tried," he replied. "You wouldn't listen." The judge raised her hand again. "Enough." The room settled. She leaned forward, bringing everything into alignment. "So here's what we have," she said. Her tone was precise now, analytical. Pre-existing property issues supported by initial photos, additional damage, at least partially admitted by the defendant, theft of at least one appliance also admitted, attempted removal of another. Each point landed clearly. "No full denial," she continued. "Only partial." The young man stood still, because there was nothing left to argue on those points. The judge's voice lowered slightly, not softer, but more focused. "You understand what just happened here?" He nodded faintly. "You changed the case," she said. "Not with evidence, with your own words." The silence that followed was different again, not tense, not uncertain, resolved. The judge looked at him for a moment longer. "Why confess?" The question came without pressure, but it carried something deeper. The young man didn't hesitate this time. "Because I was tired of lying." The courtroom didn't react outwardly, but the impact of that sentence settled heavily. The judge held his gaze. "And now," he exhaled slowly, "now whatever happens, happens." The judge nodded once, because at that point, the case no longer depended on speculation. It had been reshaped entirely by something far more powerful. Not proof, not argument, but a confession that had come too late to protect him and just in time to define the outcome. The judge sat still for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle into place. No one spoke, no one moved. The kind of silence that follows truth, not because it's shocking, but because it leaves no room for anything else. She looked down briefly at her notes, then back up at both parties. "This is no longer a complicated case," she said. Her tone was steady, controlled, and final. The young man stood with his hands at his sides, no longer trying to defend anything. The earlier resistance was gone. What remained was acceptance. The judge turned to the plaintiff. "You presented a claim for property damage, missing items, and unpaid rent," she said. "Some of that has been challenged. Some of it has been confirmed." The woman nodded slightly, her expression still firm but no longer tense in the same way. Then the judge shifted her attention back to the defendant. "You admitted to taking the microwave. You admitted to attempting to take the washing machine. You admitted to causing damage to the sink. And you acknowledged that you left without paying rent." Each point was delivered clearly, without exaggeration. The young man nodded once. "Yes, The judge leaned forward slightly. Your honesty now does not erase your actions then, she said. I understand, he replied, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his voice. The judge continued. However, she added, your admissions do allow this court to separate fact from exaggeration. That distinction mattered. She picked up one of the photographs again, glancing at it briefly before setting it down. Some of the damage shown here predates your tenancy, she said. That is supported by your initial photos. The woman opened her mouth slightly as if to object, but then stopped because she knew it was true. But, the judge continued, you are still responsible for the damage you caused, the item you took, and the rent you failed to pay. She paused, letting the structure of the decision become clear. Then she delivered it. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff, in part. The wording was precise. The woman straightened slightly. The young man remained still. You are ordered to pay for the stolen microwave, the documented repair of the sink, and the outstanding rent, the judge said. However, claims related to pre-existing damage are denied. The balance of the ruling settled evenly, not total victory, not total loss, but accountability, defined carefully. The judge looked directly at the defendant. You created this outcome, she said, not by walking in here today, but by what you chose to do before you ever stepped into this courtroom. He nodded. I know. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Your confession did not save you, she added, but it did clarify the truth, and that matters. The words were not harsh, but they were exact. The young man exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had been holding on to for far too long. Thank you, he said quietly, not in relief, not in victory, but in acceptance. The judge gave a small nod, then turned her attention back to the paperwork. This matter is concluded. The gavel came down, short, controlled, final. The woman gathered her documents, her movements precise. There was no celebration in her expression, only a firm sense of closure. The young man didn't move right away. He stood there for a moment, looking at the floor, then at the table, then finally toward the exit. When he did turn to leave, his steps were slower, but steadier than before, because whatever uncertainty had been there at the beginning was gone now, replaced by something clearer. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt quieter than usual. The young man stepped out, pausing near the wall. For a brief second, he looked back toward the courtroom doors, not with regret alone, but with understanding. Inside, the judge had already moved on to the next case, another set of claims, another set of stories waiting to be tested. But what had happened in that room lingered, not because of the damage, not because of the money, but because of the moment everything changed, when the defendant stopped defending and started telling the truth. And in that silence that followed, the case didn't just continue, it transformed. The hallway outside the courtroom remained quiet, but not empty. People passed by, some waiting for their own cases, others leaving with decisions already made. The young man stood off to the side, as if unsure where to go next. A court officer approached him, holding a document. Make sure you read this carefully, the officer said. Payment terms are listed, deadlines too. The young man nodded and took the paper. Thank you. His voice was steady now, not confident, not shaken, just steady. A few steps away, the plaintiff exited the courtroom as well. She noticed him almost immediately, but didn't react right away. For a brief moment, they stood in the same space again. No judge, no structure, no rules guiding what came next, just the outcome between them. She walked a little closer, stopping a few feet away. You could have just told me, she said. Her tone wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't forgiving either. It sat somewhere in between. The young man looked at her, then down at the paper in his hands. I know, he replied. A pause followed. You made it worse, she added. He nodded. I did. There was no argument, no attempt to soften it. That, more than anything, changed the tone of the moment. The woman studied him for a second, as if trying to reconcile the person she thought she knew with the one standing in front of her now. "Why didn't you just ask for time?" she asked. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "I thought I could fix everything before it mattered," he said. She shook her head slightly. "That's not how things work." "No," he admitted. "It's not." Another pause. Then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. "Just make the payments," she said. "That's all I want now." He looked up at her. "I will." There was no hesitation in that answer, because now, for the first time, he wasn't trying to manage the situation. He was accepting it. The woman gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, her steps measured, her expression calm. No anger left, no need for it. The matter had already been decided. The young man remained where he was for a moment longer, then unfolded the document in his hands. He read through the details carefully, amounts, dates, instructions. Each line was clear, structured, unavoidable, and unlike everything that had led up to this point, there was no room for interpretation, only responsibility. He folded the paper again and placed it in his pocket. Then he walked down the hallway, past the doors, past the waiting benches, and out into the open air. The world outside didn't pause for what had happened inside. Cars moved, people talked, life continued, but for him, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but internally, there was a difference. Inside that courtroom, he had tried to defend himself. Then he had tried to control the narrative, and finally he had stopped. And when he did, everything became clearer, even if it didn't become easier. Back inside, the judge continued hearing cases, one after another, different names, different conflicts, but the same process. Listen, question, evaluate, decide, because every case arrives wrapped in words, and every now and then one of them changes, not because of evidence alone, but because someone chooses at the right moment to stop protecting the lie and accept the truth.